Hello and welcome to the first supplemental lesson in our introduction to Java tutorials. This one's about commenting and general expectations for how your code should look and how it should be formatted. So right now you can see you're looking at NetBeans and Java, and the first thing to say is that when you're writing code, your code should always be well commented. And one of the strategies that I gave you is that when you start to devise your plan in your pseudocode, actually put your pseudocode as comments in the program, and that way you kind of have your commenting all done. But every kind of major step or collection of steps should have a comment associated with it. And one way of doing comments was with this, and the other way of doing comments was like that, right? With a beginning and an end. And so the expectation is that for your own reasons, for my reasons, and also for anyone that has to edit your code afterwards, that you explain the reasoning that's going on. The other thing is that at the beginning of programs, there should always be a bit of an explanation. It should be, who the author is. In a corporation, there'll often be supplementary edits. Things like that will be put in there. What version, who's touched it last, that kind of thing. In the context of a class, you're just going to make sure that your name is there, and maybe the assignment that you're working on might be there as well. So this is all what we call internal documentation. Another important part of internal documentation comes with variable names. One of the rules with variable names in a programming language like Java is that you name it following a convention, and you name it to be meaningful. If I want to create a variable to store the year, I will actually use, for example, the word year, and that's just to help make it readable. The other thing is that the convention is to follow something called camel case. So what that means is that you always start variables in lowercase, and if you want to put multiple words in a variable name, you start each word with a capital after that. So year of birth. Okay, and that's just a convention, but the expectation is definitely that variables start with lowercase letters, and the reason for that is to distinguish it from classes that always must start with uppercase letters. Okay, the lowercase variables are convention, but in Java you definitely need to start your classes with an uppercase letter, and the name of the file needs to match the name of the class. Okay, a lot of different conventions and rules around that. Now we're going to jump into today's lesson, which isn't so much about internal documentation as external documentation. When you write code, you're often writing code not just for yourself, but for public consumption. And so other people, other corporations, other programmers might be using that code. And so therefore, we usually have to externally document it so that if you create a method, people will know how to use your method. They don't need to know how your code works, but they do need to know how to use your method. And in Java, there's a particular format that's used for this external documentation, and it's called javadocs. Okay, and javadocs is something that gets translated into HTML and becomes part of an API, which is a document that explains how your class works, what methods there are, what fields there are, all that kind of important stuff. And so you've already learned about regular internal comments that look like this or like this. Javadoc comments are used with double stars. They're started and stopped like that. And you're not meant to comment anything inside your methods because that's all internal implementation. What Javadocs are meant to do is to comment your external things, your methods, your public variables, and to some extent your protected variables as well. Don't worry if you don't know what protected means yet. And so you can see this is a bit of a new syntax, and it follows a particular format. So once you've created these comments, the very first sentence in there, it actually could be a few lines. It doesn't have to be just one, but this is a summary of what it is that your method is supposed to do. What is it designed to accomplish? And this is so other people understand what the method is doing. After that, you're going to have to explain the specific inputs and outputs to that method. And these are called tagged paragraphs. We use an @ symbol in order to define what it is you're going to be talking about in that line, and then you give it a bit of a description. To give you an example, if your method has parameters, you will use this type of format here, where you will use @param, and then the name of the parameter, and then you'll have a description of what that particular parameter is supposed to do. What is it there for? If your parameter is called A, that's not really helpful, so you need a little sentence to explain what that parameter is for. The other @ that you're going to use, tagged paragraph, is the return. So if your method is returning something, in other words, it's not void, then you will use this @return symbol. Okay, that may seem a little bit confusing, so let me give you an example here with how javadocs might look for a simple method, which is going to tell you if your object equals another object. So don't worry about the syntax and whether you don't understand it. What we care about here is just the javadocs. They appear just outside the method, just before each method, and it's going to have a description of what it's doing. It's going to have a list of all the parameters, one per line. You can see here there's only one, and it's going to describe what the return is. And everything following here is going to be part of this tag. And so this gives you an understanding of what is going to be done in there. Now I want to jump in and give you a look at how this is done in an IDE, and specifically we're using NetBeans. So here we're back at the Java class we were looking at before, and you'll notice that I have 3 methods which are designated as public, which means that any other programmer could be using those methods. If I want to add javadocs, an IDE like NetBeans usually tries to make your life a lot easier so that you don't need to remember everything. And so watch what happens. If I go right before my method here, and remember the javadocs are /**, and if I just hit enter, NetBeans is going to create that documentation for me. Okay, and remember now, from this point on, this documentation is required in your coding. It's good programming practice. So here I can write down adds 2 numbers together and provides the result. Okay, so we're not trying to win any awards here. I'm just trying to give you an example. The first number to be added, right? And here's also where you can put any restrictions. So maybe I only want numbers that are greater than 0 or something like that, right? So if there's certain prerequisites to the parameters that are coming in, you'd put that in there. The second returns A plus B. You know, the 2 numbers added. Okay, and so this now has created that for me, and I can go ahead and I can do that for each of my methods. Many tools like NetBeans also have things to help you. So for example, you can see this tool called Analyze Javadoc. And so if I go ahead and click Analyze, NetBeans will actually tell me what I'm missing. And you can see it's analyzed and it said, yo, look, you missed 2 javadocs, one for the main method and one for this other method, answer to all. And so I could go back and fix it myself, or I could actually just select them all and I could tell NetBeans to go ahead and fix it. And you will see that NetBeans has added in now the dummy javadoc comments in here. And we can put in stuff to do and the answer to the meaning of life, the universe, and of course everything. So now we've got that. We have our javadocs, and your job as the programmer is done from that perspective, but I want to show you what happens once you've done this. So to demonstrate that, I'm going to come up here to this Run tab, and you're going to notice that there's actually something here that says Generate javadocs. And so when I click that, it is going to go through all of that wonderful code that I created, and it is going to generate, oh yes, we don't like to use Internet Explorer. Ask me later. It is going to generate the javadocs for my program. And so we were working in learning Java, and if you look now, you will see that all that information that I entered in has now been contained in this API. So if I were working on many classes with lots of methods and public stuff going on, this has now been automatically generated for me. And any programmer can come and say, oh yes, my learning Java class, it's got 3 methods that I can use. One of them is add, one of them is, right? So you can start to go through and look at that. Also, many IDEs, do you remember how we really liked the context menu? This thing? Well, once you've created your javadocs, that context menu can also work for the methods that you've created so that other people can get that drop-down helpful piece to give them information about how to do that. So, yes, programming is very mathematical, but there's also a structure, there's conventions, and there's some language associated with it as well. And so when you write code, you really should ensure that you are following conventions and naming variables and the way they look. You should be documenting and commenting your code, both for yourself and for others. And then the last piece is that you should be adding this external documentation to it. In many courses, this will count for marks, but in corporate practice, it's just generally expected of you. Anyways, hopefully this helps with a bit of understanding commenting in javadocs, and this should be the end of this series of videos. The next videos will be more and more advanced topics in Java and programming.